The crystal chandelier above Harriet Pemberton's head sparkled with 1,000 tiny flames, each one mocking her with its beauty. She stood at the edge of the ballroom, a silver tray balanced perfectly in her hands, watching ladies in silk gowns glide across the floor while she wore a plain grey dress borrowed from her aunt's lady's maid. "Harriet!" Lady Cordelia's sharp voice cut through the music. "Stop standing about like a statue. Lady Pembridge needs champagne." "Yes, Aunt Cordelia," Harriet murmured, moving swiftly toward the cluster of matrons near the windows. 27 years old. A spinster by every measure that mattered to the ton. An orphan living on the charity of relatives who made certain she earned her keep. "Is that the Pemberton girl?" she heard one woman whisper as she approached. "The niece, yes. Poor thing. No prospects whatsoever at her age." Harriet kept her face neutral as she offered the champagne. She'd learned years ago that showing pain only made people enjoy it more. "Harriet!" Her aunt's voice again, louder this time. The music had paused between dances and conversations quieted. "Come here at once." Dread pooled in Harriet's stomach as she walked back across the ballroom floor. Her aunt stood with Mrs. Weatherby and Lady Ashton, both women known for their sharp tongues and sharper eyes. "Mrs. Weatherby was just asking about you," Lady Cordelia said, her smile saccharine. "She wondered if you might be attending any house parties this autumn." The trap was obvious, but there was no way to avoid it. "I have no invitations, ma'am," Harriet replied quietly. "No invitations?" Mrs. Weatherby's eyebrows rose. "But surely, at your age—" "At her age, she should be grateful for a roof over her head," Lady Cordelia interrupted, with a laugh that wasn't quite a laugh. "My poor brother left nothing but debts when he died. Harriet has been our burden for nearly 10 years now. A dead weight, as my husband says, though she does make herself useful with the servants." The words landed like physical blows. Around them, conversations faltered. Some guests looked away in embarrassment. Others watched with the fascinated cruelty of those who enjoy another's misfortune. "How charitable of you," Lady Ashton murmured, her tone suggesting anything but admiration. Harriet's cheeks burned, but she kept her spine straight. "If you'll excuse me, Aunt, I believe the kitchen needs—" Yes, run along," Lady Cordelia waved her away dismissively. "Do try not to get in anyone's way." Harriet walked toward the terrace doors with measured steps, refusing to flee, though every instinct screamed at her to run. The cool September air hit her face as she stepped outside, and only then did she allow herself to breathe properly. The garden stretched before her, illuminated by lanterns hanging from tree branches. She moved quickly down the path, away from the house, away from the laughter and music that felt like mockery. Her vision blurred with tears she'd held back for too long. "Crying at a ball seems rather cliché, don't you think?" Harriet spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. A man stood in the shadows near a stone bench, tall and broad-shouldered. He stepped into the light, and she recognized him instantly, the Duke of Thornfield. Everyone knew Reginald Ashworth, even if from a distance. Wealthy, powerful, and famously withdrawn from society since his wife's death 5 years ago. "I apologize, Your Grace," she said quickly, wiping her eyes. "I didn't realize anyone was here." "Neither did I." He moved closer, his expression unreadable in the lantern light. His voice was deep, measured. "Though I suspect we're both hiding from the same tedious affair." "You can hide anywhere you choose," Harriet replied before she could stop herself. "I have no such luxury." Something shifted in his expression. Curiosity, perhaps. "I heard what your aunt said. In there." Fresh humiliation washed over her. "Then you know I should apologize for taking up your time, Your Grace. I'm sure you didn't come out here to witness a poor relation's disgrace." "Actually," he said slowly, studying her with dark eyes that seemed to see too much. I came out here because ballrooms are filled with people who want something from me. Money, influence, connections. He paused. You're the first person I've met in years who clearly wants nothing at all. Harriet laughed a broken sound. I want a great deal, Your Grace. I simply know better than to expect it. What do you want? The question was so direct, so unexpected, that she answered honestly. Safety, dignity, a place where I'm not a burden or an object of pity. She shook her head. Foolish dreams. Perhaps not. He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his tone was carefully neutral. I need a wife, Harriet blinked. I beg your pardon. I need a wife, he repeated. Parliament has been pressuring me to remarry. My mother writes weekly letters filled with suitable candidates. I find the entire process exhausting. He looked at her directly. You need protection and a position. I need someone who won't expect romance or demand more than I can give. It seems a practical solution. Her breath caught. You're not serious. I'm entirely serious. I'm offering you a marriage of convenience, Miss Pemberton. You would be a duchess with all the security and respect that entails. In return, I ask only that you manage the household and appear at necessary social functions. His voice remained steady, businesslike. There would be no demands of an intimate nature unless you wished otherwise. Separate bedchambers, separate lives in many respects. Harriet's mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. Dukes didn't propose to penniless spinsters in gardens at midnight. Why me? She whispered. Because you won't fall in love with me, he said simply. Because you understand what it means to be disappointed. Because, he hesitated, because when you looked at me just now, you didn't see my title or my wealth. You saw another person hiding from a ballroom. She should refuse. She should be insulted. But she thought of 10 more years with Lady Cordelia, of growing old as an unpaid servant in her cousin's house, of never having anything of her own. When? She asked. His eyes flickered with something. Approval, perhaps, or relief. I can secure a special license by Wednesday. We could be married by the end of the week. Very well. The words came out stronger than she felt. I accept. Good. He nodded once. I'll call on your aunt tomorrow to make the arrangements. Pack only what you truly need. You'll have a new wardrobe befitting your position. Your Grace, she said as he turned to go, thank you. Whatever your reasons, you've given me a chance I never thought I'd have. He looked back at her, his expression almost sad. Don't thank me yet, Miss Pemberton. You may come to regret this bargain. But Harriet shook her head. Anything is better than what I'm leaving behind. Perhaps, he murmured, and disappeared back into the shadows of the garden. 3 days of whirlwind preparation passed in a blur. Lady Cordelia's rage at losing her unpaid servant transformed into simpering pleasure at the connection to a duke. The wedding itself was small, a cold ceremony at his London townhouse, with only the minister, 2 witnesses, and the weight of obligation hanging in the air. By evening, they were travelling north to Derbyshire in his elegant carriage. Harriet watched the countryside roll past, trying to convince herself this was real. She was a duchess now, the Duchess of Thornfield. The words felt foreign in her mind. Ashworth Manor appeared as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. The house was magnificent, ancient stone covered in ivy, windows glowing with warm light. Nothing like the cold townhouse where they'd married. Welcome home, Your Grace, a woman with kind eyes and grey hair said as they entered the main hall. I'm Mrs. Dawson, the housekeeper. We are honoured to have a duchess at Ashworth again. Thank you, Harriet managed, overwhelmed by the grandeur around her. "Mrs. Dawson will show you to your chambers," Reginald said, his tone formal. "I trust you'll find them comfortable. Dinner will be served at 8 if you wish to dine, or I can have a tray sent up." "A tray would be preferable tonight, Your Grace," Harriet replied, matching his formality. The journey was long. He nodded. "Of course. Mrs. Dawson, please see that Her Grace has everything she requires." The housekeeper led Harriet up a grand staircase and down a long corridor to a suite of rooms that took her breath away. Pale blue walls, elegant furniture, windows overlooking gardens that stretched into the distance. "These were the previous Duchess's chambers," Mrs. Dawson said gently. "His Grace had them completely redecorated. Nothing remains from before." "It's beautiful," Harriet whispered. "I'll have your dinner brought up within the hour." The housekeeper paused at the door. "If I may be so bold, Your Grace, it's good to have warmth in this house again. It's been far too cold for far too long." After Mrs. Dawson left, Harriet explored her new rooms in a daze. A sitting room with a fireplace, a bedroom with a bed large enough for 4 people, a dressing room already being filled with trunks of new clothing, and through it all, a strange emptiness. A knock on the connecting door made her turn. "May I enter?" Reginald's voice came through the wood. "Yes, of course." He stepped in, still wearing his travelling clothes. The firelight cast shadows across his face, making him look older, more severe. "I wanted to ensure you're settling in comfortably," he said. "Everything is more than I could have imagined," Harriet replied honestly. "Thank you." "Good." He crossed to the window, standing with his back to her. "I should be clear about the terms of our arrangement." Harriet's chest tightened. "Of course. You are the Duchess of Thornfield now, with all the privileges and responsibilities that entails. You'll want for nothing materially. The household staff answers to you. My steward will meet with you weekly to discuss any needs or concerns." He spoke as if reading from a contract. "In public, we will present a united front. In private," he turned to face her and his expression was carefully blank. "In private, I ask only that we maintain civility." "I understand. There's one more thing." His jaw tightened. "Don't fall in love with me, Harriet." The word struck her like a slap. "I mean that sincerely," he continued, his voice low and urgent. "This is a practical arrangement. I chose you because you understand disappointment, because you won't have illusions about what this is. I can give you security, respect, comfort, but I will not give you romance or affection. My heart," he paused, "my heart died with my late wife's betrayal. What's left is duty, nothing more." Harriet forced herself to nod, though something in his words cut deeper than her aunt's cruelties ever had. "I understand, Your Grace. You need not worry. I know exactly what this marriage is." "Good." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "But I hope you'll be happy here nonetheless. You deserve that much at least." The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Harriet was alone in her beautiful prison. She moved to the window, looking out at the moonlit gardens below. Free from humiliation and poverty, yes, but perhaps lonelier than she'd ever been. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the first tears slip down her cheeks. "Don't fall in love with him," he'd said, as if she were foolish enough to do such a thing, as if her heart were so easily controlled. 2 weeks passed in a strange rhythm of isolation and opulence. Harriet woke each morning in her magnificent chambers, breakfasted alone, and spent her days exploring the vast house and grounds. She discovered libraries filled with books, conservatories bursting with exotic flowers, and gardens that seemed to stretch forever. She rarely saw her husband. Reginald appeared only at dinner, and even then the meals were exercises in polite silence. They sat at opposite ends of a table meant for 20, with empty chairs between them like ghosts of what this marriage wasn't. "Did you ride out today?" he might ask. "I walked through the rose gardens," she might reply, and that would be the extent of their conversation. Mrs. Dawson, at least, was a comfort. The housekeeper had taken a genuine liking to Harriet, teaching her the routines of the great house and introducing her to the staff with pride. "The staff adores you already, Your Grace," Mrs. Dawson said one morning as they reviewed the week's menus. "The way you spoke to young Thomas yesterday when he spilled tea. You're the first mistress in years who didn't scold." "He was nervous," Harriet replied, "and the tea wasn't that hot. There was no harm done. The late Duchess would have had him dismissed." Mrs. Dawson's expression sobered. "Forgive me for speaking out of turn." "Not at all." Harriet set down her pen. "Mrs. Dawson, what happened?" "To the late Duchess?" The housekeeper's face tightened with old disapproval. "It's not my place to say, Your Grace, but—" She hesitated. "His Grace loved her deeply. Her death nearly destroyed him. That's all you need to know." But it wasn't all Harriet needed to know, not really. She wanted to understand the man she'd married, the pain that had carved such emptiness into him. She wanted to know why he'd built such high walls around his heart. She wanted things she had no right to want. That evening, Harriet discovered a small music room tucked in the east wing. A pianoforte sat near the windows, covered in a film of dust. She ran her fingers over the keys experimentally, wincing at the out-of-tune notes. "I haven't heard music in this house for 5 years." She spun around to find Reginald standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I apologize," she said quickly. "I was exploring and found... It was my wife's." He entered the room slowly, almost reluctantly. She played beautifully, or so everyone said. I later discovered she preferred playing for her other audience. The bitterness in his voice was like poison. "I'm sorry," Harriet whispered. "Are you?" He looked at her directly for the first time in days. "Most people offer empty platitudes. You sound as if you actually mean it." "I do mean it." She moved away from the pianoforte. "I know what it's like to be hurt by people who should care for you. The wounds they leave don't heal easily." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps. "Your aunt? Among others?" Harriet smiled sadly. "After my parents died, I learned that charity has a price. Every meal, every dress, every roof over my head came with reminders of my burden. I became very skilled at making myself invisible." "You're not invisible now." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither of them would acknowledge. "I should go," Reginald said abruptly. "Forgive the intrusion." He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone with the dusty pianoforte and the ghost of his pain. The 3rd week of their marriage brought an unexpected crisis. Harriet woke before dawn to commotion in the servants' quarters. She threw on a dressing gown and followed the sounds to the kitchen, where she found young Molly, one of the cooks, crying over her daughter. "She's burning up, Your Grace," Molly sobbed. I don't know what to do. The fever won't break." Harriet knelt beside the small cot where the child lay, feeling her forehead. The girl couldn't be more than 5 years old, her face flushed and damp with sweat. "Have you sent for the doctor?" Harriet asked Mrs. Dawson, who had appeared in her nightcap. "He's attending a difficult birth in the village. Won't be available until morning." "Then we manage until he comes." Harriet turned to Molly. "Get me cool water and clean cloths. Mrs. Dawson, do you have feverfew or willow bark?" "You know, physicking?" Mrs. Dawson asked in surprise. "My mother taught me. She often helped tenants on our estate." Harriet touched the child's cheek gently. What's her name? Sally, Your Grace. Well, Sally, we're going to make you feel better. For the next several hours, Harriet worked to bring down the fever. She bathed the child's face with cool water, administered willow bark tea in small sips, and when Sally cried for a story, Harriet read from a book of fairy tales she'd brought from the library. Sometime after 2 a.m, exhaustion caught up with her. She positioned a chair beside Sally's cot, meaning to rest her eyes for just a moment. But the gentle rhythm of the child's breathing and the warmth of the kitchen fire pulled her into sleep. She didn't hear the footsteps approaching, didn't know anyone was there until strong arms slid beneath her, lifting her from the chair. "Reginald?" she murmured, half asleep. "Shh." His voice rumbled against her ear. "The child is sleeping peacefully. You need rest." "But, Sally?" "Mrs. Dawson will stay with her. The doctor will be here in a few hours." Harriet was too tired to argue. She let herself relax against his chest, aware of the warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart, the subtle scent of sandalwood and something uniquely him. It felt dangerously like safety. He carried her through the silent house and up the stairs to her chambers. When he laid her on the bed, she caught his hand without thinking. "Thank you," she whispered. In the darkness, she couldn't quite see his expression, but his hand tightened around hers for just a moment. "You sat with a servant's child all night. Most duchesses wouldn't have noticed she was ill. Most duchesses weren't servants themselves, in all but name." He was quiet for a long moment. "You're nothing like her." "Like who?" "Like anyone." He pulled his hand away gently. "Sleep, Harriet." The door closed and she was alone again. But this time, the loneliness felt different, less absolute. The following evening's dinner was different. Reginald actually looked at her when she entered the dining room. "Mrs. Dawson tells me Sally is recovering well," he said as they sat down. "Yes, the fever broke this morning. The doctor confirmed she'll be fine with rest." "That's good." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "You were kind to her, to Molly. They won't forget it." "I didn't do it for gratitude." "I know. That's what makes it remarkable." He set down his wine glass. "Tell me about your mother. You said she taught you physicking." Harriet blinked in surprise. He'd never asked her a personal question before. She believed that those with means had a responsibility to help those without. Every Tuesday, she held an open door for any tenants who needed medical advice or assistance. I would go with her. Learn from her. "What happened to your parents?" The old pain tightened her chest, but she found she wanted to tell him. "Carriage accident when I was 17. They'd been to London for the season. The axle broke on the journey home." She looked down at her plate. "They died together. I find some comfort in that neither had to live without the other. They loved each other terribly. That kind of love is rare." "Yes," she met his eyes. "That's why its loss is so devastating." Understanding passed between them, unspoken but clear. They both knew the cost of loving deeply. "My wife and I didn't have that," Reginald said quietly. "I realise that now. I was infatuated with her beauty, her charm. She was infatuated with my title and wealth. Neither of us saw the other clearly. You loved her nonetheless." "I loved who I thought she was. But that person never existed." His jaw tightened. "When she died, giving birth to her lover's child, I didn't grieve the loss of her. I grieved the loss of my illusions, the realization that I'd been a fool." Harriet's heart ached for him. "You weren't a fool. You were young and trusting. Those are virtues, not weaknesses." "Are they? Sometimes I think cynicism is the only wisdom." "If you truly believed that," she said softly, "you wouldn't have hired tutors for the village children, or maintained pensions for elderly servants who can no longer work, or ensured that every tenant has firewood for winter. She'd learned all of this from Mrs. Dawson and the staff. A cynic doesn't care for others. You do. You just pretend not to. He stared at her, something indefinable in his expression. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. A short, rusty sound as if he'd forgotten how. You're dangerous, Harriet. Why? Because you notice things. He stood suddenly restless. I should attend to some correspondence. At this hour? I find I'm not fit for company this evening after all. He left abruptly, and Harriet sat alone at the long table, wondering what nerve she'd touched, but also wondering at the sound of his laugh. Rare and rusty, but real. She'd made him laugh. Somehow that felt like a small victory. The next week brought Reginald's closest friend for an extended visit. Lord Anthony Blackwell arrived in a storm of energy and good humour that seemed to fill the house with light. Ashworth, you old bear, stop glowering at me, Anthony said cheerfully as he clasped Reginald's hand. And this must be the Duchess. Your Grace, I'm charmed. Absolutely charmed. He bowed over Harriet's hand with theatrical flourish, and she found herself smiling despite her nervousness. Lord Blackwell, welcome to Ashworth Manor. Please, call me Anthony. Anyone who can convince this hermit to rejoin society deserves informal address. I haven't rejoined society, Reginald said dryly. I simply acquired a wife. Same thing, old friend. Same thing. Over dinner that evening, Anthony kept them entertained with stories from London. He was everything Reginald wasn't. Expressive, talkative, effortlessly charming. But Harriet noticed how often he watched Reginald, concern flickering in his eyes. So, Your Grace, Anthony said as dessert was served, how are you finding Derbyshire? Frightfully dull after London, I imagine. I was never in London society, Harriet replied honestly. I find Derbyshire peaceful, beautiful. And the old bear here, treating you well? Anthony, Reginald warned, it's a fair question. You're not exactly known for your warmth and sunshine. Anthony turned back to Harriet, his tone gentler. Forgive me for being forward, Your Grace, but I worry about my friend. He's been alone too long, built too many walls. Perhaps some walls are necessary, Harriet said quietly, feeling Reginald's tension across the table. Perhaps. But walls that keep everyone out also keep the occupant locked in. Anthony raised his glass. 2 new beginnings. May they prove more hopeful than old endings. Later that night, Harriet couldn't sleep. She wandered down to the library, hoping a book might quiet her restless mind. But when she opened the door, she heard voices. Reginald and Anthony, speaking in low tones near the fireplace. She should have turned back, should have given them privacy, but she heard her name and froze. You treat her like furniture, Reginald. Anthony's voice was firm, like she's decoration for the house, not a person. Our arrangement is perfectly clear to both of us. Is it? Because from where I stand, you found a kind, intelligent woman who asks nothing of you, and you're determined to keep her at arm's length out of sheer stubbornness. You don't understand. I understand that you're punishing her for your late wife's sins, and that's not fair. She's not Catherine. She's nothing like Catherine. Silence. Then Reginald's voice rough with emotion. I know that. Do you? Then why do you act as if caring for her would be a betrayal? Because caring leads to pain. The words exploded from Reginald. Because trusting someone, opening yourself to them, giving them power over your heart, it destroys you when they abuse it. I won't survive that again, Anthony. I can't. So you'll survive by not living at all? That's not survival, my friend. That's just existing. Harriet backed away silently, her heart pounding. She didn't want to hear more, didn't want to know how deeply his fear ran. But also, buried beneath her own fear, something warm bloomed. He'd said, "I know that." He saw her as different. He saw her. That shouldn't matter, but it did. The storm came 3 nights later, a violent autumn tempest that rattled the windows and sent rain hammering against the walls. Thunder rolled across the sky like cannon fire, and lightning split the darkness in jagged white lines. Harriet pressed herself against the pillows in her bed, trying to control her breathing. She'd hated storms since childhood, since the night her parents died. Thunder always brought back the memory of that frantic knocking on the door, the servant's ashen face, the words that shattered her world. Another crack of thunder shook the house, and she gave up pretending to sleep. She wrapped a shawl around her nightdress and slipped out of her room, heading for the library. Reading might distract her until the storm passed, but when she entered the library, she found it already occupied. Reginald stood at the window, watching the storm, a glass of brandy in his hand. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to disturb you." "You're not disturbing me." He turned, and in the firelight she could see concern in his expression. "Are you, well? You're trembling." "The storm," she admitted, feeling foolish. "I've never liked them." "Come sit by the fire." It wasn't quite an invitation, but it wasn't dismissive either. She settled into one of the leather chairs, and he took the chair opposite, closer than they'd been in weeks. The fire crackled between them, warm and bright against the darkness. "My parents died during a storm," she found herself saying. "Not because of it, but the thunder reminds me of that night. The fear before knowing, the feeling that something terrible was about to happen." "Memory is cruel that way," Reginald said quietly. "It ties pain to the most arbitrary things. Rain, music, a particular scent." "What reminds you of her?" She shouldn't have asked, but the darkness and the storm made her bold. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, laughter. Specifically, the kind of laughter that doesn't reach the eyes. Performative joy. He stared into his brandy. "She was always performing. I was too besotted to see it." "You said you loved who you thought she was," Harriet said gently. "That means you're capable of love. That's not a flaw. Isn't it? When that capability leads to destruction. Capacity for love and capacity for judgment are different things. You loved badly, perhaps, but you loved. That's more than many people manage in a lifetime." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "How did you stay kind? After years of cruelty from your relatives, how did you not become bitter and hard?" "Who says I'm not bitter?" She smiled sadly. "I'm bitter about many things. The lost years, the humiliation, the feeling of being unwanted." She paused. "But I decided bitterness would only hurt me. It would change me into someone my parents wouldn't recognize. So I chose to stay soft, even though soft things bruise more easily." Thunder crashed and Harriet flinched. Without thinking, Reginald moved to her chair, kneeling beside it so they were at eye level. "You're safe here," he said, his voice low and steady. "The house is solid. The storm will pass." "I know, it's not rational, the fear, but knowing doesn't make it easier." His hand covered hers on the chair arm, warm and surprisingly gentle. "Then we'll sit here together until it passes. Irrational fear is easier to face with company." They stayed like that, his hand over hers, the storm raging outside. And slowly, Harriet realized she wasn't thinking about the thunder anymore. She was thinking about the warmth of his hand, the concern in his eyes, the way firelight caught the silver threading through his dark hair. Harriet, he said softly, and her name in his mouth sounded different than it ever had. I need to tell you something. Yes? That first night, when I warned you not to fall in love with me, I wasn't being cruel. I was being honest. I have nothing to offer you but duty and distance. I know, but lately I find myself wondering if... He trailed off, his jaw tightening. Never mind. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. He looked at her then, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Does it? Why? Because I'm already falling for you, she thought. Because your rare smiles feel like sunshine. Because your pain speaks to mine. Because when you carried me to my room, I felt safer than I've felt since my parents died. But she couldn't say any of that. Not when he'd explicitly told her not to love him. Because you're my husband, she said instead. Your well-being matters to me. Something like disappointment flickered in his eyes. Of course. Duty. He stood abruptly, moving back to his chair. The distance between them felt like miles now. The storm is easing, he said, his tone formal again. You should return to your chambers and rest. Reginald. Good night, Harriet. She left, her heart heavy, wondering what he'd almost said. Wondering if she'd given the wrong answer to a question he hadn't quite asked. The next morning brought an unexpected delivery, a letter bearing her aunt's seal. Harriet opened it in her sitting room, and with each line she read, her hands trembled more. My dearest Harriet, I hope this letter finds you well. It has been too long since we've spoken, and I find myself missing you terribly. Your uncle and I were reflecting just yesterday on how much you meant to our family. We were perhaps too harsh in our treatment of you. Grief over your dear father's death made us thoughtless. I would very much like to visit you at Ashworth Manor. I'm certain we could renew our family bonds now that you're so wonderfully settled. Perhaps you might even introduce me to some of the Duke's influential friends. There's a baronetcy that young Philip is quite interested in. The letter went on, but Harriet couldn't read more. Her vision blurred with tears, not of sadness, but of rage. How dare she? How dare Lady Cordelia pretend affection now, when Harriet was useful to her? Your Grace? Mrs. Dawson entered, then stopped. Oh, my dear, what's happened? Nothing. Harriet tried to compose herself, but a sob escaped. Nothing at all. That's clearly not true. The housekeeper sat beside her, taking her hand. Tell me. And Harriet did. 10 years of humiliation poured out. The constant reminders of her burden, the deliberate exclusions, the way her aunt had treated her like a servant while maintaining the fiction of charity. The words tumbled out in a rush, years of pain finally given voice. And now, she finished, crumpling the letter, now she wants to visit. To use my position for her own benefit, as if I've forgotten. As if any of it was acceptable. That woman, Mrs. Dawson said with fierce protectiveness, is not welcome in this house. You're the Duchess here. You decide who visits. Am I, though? Harriet wiped her eyes. A duchess in name, perhaps. But what do I really have? A husband who can barely stand to be in the same room with me. A beautiful prison. At least, at my aunt's, I knew what I was. And what are you now? I don't know. The admission broke something in her, and she began to cry in earnest. Great, gasping sobs that she'd held back for weeks. For years. She didn't hear the door open, didn't know Reginald was there until arms wrapped around her, pulling her close. Harriet, he murmured against her hair. Harriet, what's wrong? She tried to pull away, ashamed of her breakdown, but he held her tighter. Let me see it, he said gently, nodding to the crumpled letter. Through her tears, she handed it to him. She felt his body tense as he read, felt rage radiating from him in waves. "That woman will never set foot in this house," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Never. Do you understand me? She's my aunt. She's a cruel, manipulative woman who treated you abominably." He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You are not a burden, Harriet. You never were. You are intelligent and kind and brave, and anyone who made you feel otherwise deserves nothing from you. Not your time, not your forgiveness, and certainly not access to your new position." "But what am I now?" she whispered. "What is this?" "This?" He searched her face, his expression torn. "This is complicated. This is not what I expected. This is duty," she finished bitterly. "You've made that very clear." "No," the word came out fierce. "No, it stopped being just duty the moment I carried you to bed and wished I had an excuse to stay. It stopped being duty when I found myself listening for your laugh in other rooms. It stopped being duty when Anthony told me I was treating you poorly, and I realised he was right, and I hated myself for it." Harriet's breath caught. "Reginald, I warned you not to fall in love with me," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "But I'm realising now that I issued that warning to the wrong person. I should have warned myself." Hope fled in her chest, terrifying and bright. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to trust again, how to be vulnerable. The thought of opening my heart terrifies me." He touched her face gently. "But the thought of continuing as we are, living in the same house but worlds apart, terrifies me more." "I didn't mean to break your rules," she whispered. "You didn't break anything. You just—" He smiled, sad and wondering. "You just existed, being yourself. And somehow that was enough to make me hope again, to make me want things I'd sworn I'd never want." "What do you want?" "You," he said simply. "Not the convenient wife I married, not the duchess who manages my household. You, Harriet, the woman who sits with sick children and notices things and stays soft even though the world has been hard to her." Tears spilled down her cheeks again, but this time they were different. "I think I've been falling for you since that night in the garden," she admitted. "When you saw me, really saw me, not as a burden or a spinster or a poor relation, but as a person. I'm going to hurt you," he warned, his voice breaking. "I'm going to be difficult and closed off and terrible at this. I'm going to disappoint you. Then disappoint me, hurt me, be difficult." She covered his hand with hers. "But do it while trying, while being here. That's all I ask, that you try." For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then, slowly, carefully, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was tentative at first, questioning. But when she kissed him back, it deepened, becoming something urgent and desperate. Years of loneliness and fear dissolving into connection and hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm still terrified," he admitted. "Good," she said, managing a shaky laugh. "So am I. We can be terrified together." "Together," he repeated, as if testing the word. "Yes, I think I'd like that." The following week brought an invitation Harriet couldn't refuse. A small dinner party at Ashworth Manor for local gentry. Their first formal event as host and hostess. "We needn't accept," Reginald said as they sat together in the library. A new habit they'd developed. He on the sofa, she curled in the adjacent chair, their hands linked between them. "I can send regrets." "No," Harriet said firmly. "I'm the Duchess of Thornfield. It's time I acted like it." He smiled at her fierceness. "Very well, but I warn you, these affairs are tediously dull." "Coming from a man who hid in gardens at balls?" "Exactly my point." The preparations consumed several days. Mrs. Dawson was in her element, organising staff and menus with military precision. Harriet threw herself into the planning, grateful for the distraction. What she didn't know was that Lady Cordelia had somehow learned of the dinner party and had invited herself, arriving with her son Philip 2 days before the event. Harriet was in the conservatory examining rose cuttings when Mrs. Dawson found her, wringing her hands anxiously. "Your Grace, I'm so sorry. They insisted they had an invitation. The footman didn't know." "Who?" But Harriet already knew. Her stomach dropped as she entered the drawing room to find her aunt installed on the best sofa, examining the room with proprietary interest. "Harriet!" Lady Cordelia rose, arms outstretched. "My darling niece, how wonderful to see you!" "Aunt Cordelia." Harriet's voice was ice. "I don't recall issuing an invitation." "Oh, well, when we heard about your little dinner party, we simply couldn't stay away. Family should support family after all." Her aunt's smile was sharp. "And Philip is so eager to meet the Duke's associates. Aren't you, dear?" Philip, her cousin, nodded eagerly. He'd never been cruel like his mother, just weak and easily led. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," Harriet said carefully. "We're not able to accommodate unexpected guests." "Nonsense. Surely this grand house has room for family." Lady Cordelia settled back on the sofa. "We'll just stay until after the dinner party. A few days at most." Harriet's hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to rage, to throw them out, to tell her aunt exactly what she thought of her manipulative games. But years of training held her silent. "If you'll excuse me," she said stiffly, "I need to inform the Duke of your arrival." She found Reginald in his study, reviewing accounts with his steward. One look at her face had him dismissing the man immediately. "What's happened?" "My aunt is here, uninvited, with my cousin. She's insisting on staying for the dinner party." The words came out clipped, angry. "I tried to refuse her, but she steamrolled you." Reginald's expression darkened. "Show me where she is." "Reginald, you can't just throw out." "Can't I? Watch me." He strode toward the drawing room with Harriet hurrying after him. But when they arrived, Lady Cordelia had arranged herself into the picture of genteel refinement, practicing the performance she'd perfected over decades. "Your Grace!" She rose with a deep curtsy. "How honoured we are to be welcomed to your magnificent home." "Lady Cordelia," Reginald's voice could have frozen fire, "I don't recall extending an invitation." "Oh, surely, family needn't stand on such ceremony. When Harriet married into such an elevated position, we simply had to reconnect. Blood is blood, after all." "Is it?" Reginald moved to stand beside Harriet, his hand finding hers. "Tell me, Lady Cordelia, did you consider blood when you called your niece a burden, when you used her as unpaid labour, when you publicly humiliated her at every opportunity?" Lady Cordelia's smile faltered. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "I mean," he continued, his tone deadly, "that you treated a grieving young woman with unspeakable cruelty for nearly a decade. And now that she's in a position to be useful to you, you dare to claim familial affection. Now, see here. No, you see here." Reginald's voice cut like a blade. "You will leave this house immediately. You will not contact my wife again. You will not speak her name in public. And if you ever attempt to use your connection to her for social advancement, I will make it my personal mission to ensure every door in society closes to you. Am I clear?" Philip had gone pale. Even Lady Cordelia seemed shaken by the cold fury in the Duke's voice. "Harriet," her aunt tried one last time, "surely you won't allow—" "Get out!" Harriet's voice rang clear and strong. "You heard the Duke. Get out of my home." For a moment, Lady Cordelia's mask slipped, revealing the bitter, grasping woman beneath. Then she drew herself up with wounded dignity. "I see. Well, We know when we're not wanted. Come. Philip. They swept out in a rustle of silk and indignation. Harriet stood frozen, shaking with adrenaline and residual fear. Harriet? Reginald touched her arm gently. I've wanted to do that for 10 years, she whispered. Then she started laughing, great, gasping laughs that were half sobs. I can't believe I actually did it. You were magnificent. He pulled her close, and she buried her face in his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. I'm proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. You're stronger than you know. He kissed the top of her head. But I'm glad you didn't have to do it alone. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other. Then Harriet pulled back, looking up at him with concern. But we've barely spoken this past week, since the night of the storm. You thought I was retreating again? He sighed. I was, or trying to, but Anthony pointed out, rather forcefully, that I was being an idiot. Anthony is wise. Anthony is a meddling busybody. But Reginald smiled as he said it. He's also right. I was afraid of what I was feeling, so I tried to push you away again, tried to convince myself that distance would protect us both. And I realized that the only thing distance protects is loneliness. He cupped her face in his hands. I don't want to be lonely anymore, Harriet, and I don't want you to be lonely either. Then, what do you want? I want to try, truly try, not just to be your husband in name, but to be your partner, your friend, your... He hesitated. My love, she offered softly. Yes. The word came out like a prayer. If you'll have me, if you can be patient with my failures and my fears. I warned you that I was already falling, she reminded him. So, yes, yes to all of it. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, a promise and a vow. When they broke apart, both smiling, he touched his forehead to hers. You know what the most terrifying part of this is? He murmured. What? I warned you not to fall in love with me, but I'm realizing now that I fell first. That night I found you crying in the garden. Something in me recognized something in you. I was just too much of a coward to admit it. Harriet's heart swelled. Well then, we're both fools. Together, though. Together, she agreed. The dinner party that weekend was a resounding success. Harriet moved through the evening with grace and confidence, every inch the Duchess. Reginald stayed close, his hand often finding the small of her back, his pride in her evident to everyone present. Your wife is delightful, one of the guests told him, as the ladies retired for tea. You're a fortunate man, Thornfield. I'm aware, Reginald replied, watching Harriet laugh at something Mrs. Dawson whispered to her. More fortunate than I deserve. Later, after the guests departed and the house fell quiet, they walked through the gardens together, under a sky full of stars. The autumn air was crisp, smelling of wood smoke and dying roses. I think that went rather well, Harriet said, leaning against his side. You were perfect. He stopped beneath an oak tree, turning her to face him. I need to tell you something. That sounds ominous. Not ominous, just overdue. He took both her hands in his. That first night, when I warned you not to fall in love with me, I was protecting myself. I'd been hurt so badly that I couldn't imagine risking that pain again. But what I didn't realize was that protecting myself from pain also protected me from joy, from connection, from you. Reginald, let me finish. He smiled at her. You came into my life when I was determined to remain alone. You asked nothing from me, expected nothing, and somehow that made me want to give you everything. You saw through my walls to the person I used to be, the person I thought I'd lost. You made me remember what it felt like to hope. Tears pricked Harriet's eyes. You did the same for me. You saw me when I'd spent years being invisible. You gave me not just security, but dignity, worth, a home. You are my home, he said fiercely. You, not this house, not the title, not any of it. Just you. I love you, she whispered. I know I'm not supposed to, but I do. I love you so much it terrifies me. Good, he replied, echoing her words from weeks ago. Because I love you too, and I intend to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. He kissed her beneath the stars, and Harriet felt something settle into place, a sense of belonging she'd never known. She was home, truly home. Come, Reginald said eventually, taking her hand. It's cold. Let's go inside. Together? She asked playfully. Always together, he promised. No more separate chambers, no more distance, just us. As they walked back to the house, Harriet remembered that first night when she stood at her window, free but lonely. How wrong she'd been. This wasn't a beautiful prison. It was a beginning. 3 months later, Harriet woke to sunlight streaming through windows she now shared with her husband. Reginald was already awake, propped on one elbow, watching her with an expression that still made her heart flutter. Good morning, she murmured sleepily. Good morning. He leaned down to kiss her softly. How are you feeling? She considered. The morning sickness had been difficult these past weeks, but today she felt relatively well. Better, actually. Good. His hand moved to rest on her still flat stomach, reverent and wondering. I can't quite believe it yet, that we're going to have a child. Neither can I. She covered his hand with hers. Are you happy? Terrified, he admitted, but happy? Yes. They lay like that for a moment, comfortable in the silence. Then Harriet smiled. I was thinking, she said, about that first night, when you warned me not to fall in love with you. One of my more foolish moments. No, I understand why you said it. You were protecting yourself. But here's the thing. She turned to face him fully. I think you knew even then that it was futile. I think part of you wanted me to fall in love with you, even as you warned me not to. Reginald was quiet, considering. Then he laughed, that sound that had become so much more frequent, so much easier for him. You're probably right. Anthony certainly thinks so. He claims he knew from the moment I carried you out of that garden that I was already lost. Anthony is very wise. Anthony is very smug, but he said it fondly. Though I suppose he's earned the right. He was telling me for years to stop hiding. I'm glad you did. Stop hiding, I mean. So am I. He pulled her closer and she nestled against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. You know what the most remarkable thing is? What? I warned you not to fall in love with me, he said softly, but I fell first. I was already falling that night in the garden, watching you hold your head high, even as your heart was breaking. I just didn't want to admit it. Well then, Harriet said, smiling against his chest, I suppose we're both guilty of breaking your rule. The best rule I ever broke, he murmured, kissing her temple. Outside, they could hear the manor coming to life, servants beginning their morning routines, birds singing in the gardens, the distant sound of the village church bells, all the sounds of home. Harriet thought about the girl she'd been, invisible, lonely, convinced she was a burden, and she thought about the woman she'd become, loved, valued, finally seen. Reginald, she said, Thank you, for that night in the garden, for offering me a chance, for seeing me. He lifted her chin so she had to meet his eyes. "No, Harriet, thank you, for being brave enough to accept, for teaching me that opening your heart isn't weakness, it's the greatest strength there is, for loving me even when I made it difficult." "It was never difficult to love you," she said honestly. "Even when you were pushing me away, I loved you." "Then I'm the luckiest man alive." He kissed her again, slow and deep. "Now, shall we have breakfast? I hear Mrs. Dawson made your favourite pastries." "She's going to spoil me terribly." "You deserve to be spoiled terribly." They rose together, dressing and laughing and stealing kisses. Later, as they descended the stairs hand in hand, Harriet caught sight of their reflection in a hall mirror. The Duke and Duchess of Thornfield, together, happy. She'd come to this house a stranger, looking for safety. She'd found so much more. She'd found love. She'd found home. She'd found herself. And every day she thanked the stars for that night in the garden when a lonely duke had found a crying woman and made an impulsive offer that changed both their lives. "What are you smiling about?" Reginald asked as they entered the breakfast room. "Us," she said simply. "I'm smiling about us." He squeezed her hand, understanding in his eyes. "So am I, love. So am I." Outside, autumn was giving way to winter, the gardens preparing for their long sleep. But inside Ashworth Manor, spring had come early, bringing warmth and light and the promise of new beginnings. The Duke, who'd warned against love, had learned to love again. The Duchess, who'd been invisible, had finally been seen. And together, they'd found something neither had expected. They'd found home.